across to some of the crime data. There were 88 crimes against society, which is down by about a third from last year at the same time. 281 crimes against property, consistent with last year. 94 crimes against person, which is above last year's figure by 14. And 106 other crimes against person in what's called Group B, where they're grouping different crimes into different categories.
I have a quick question that surprisingly hasn't come to light to me until now. Do we have a target for each of these?
As far as the individuals, no.
The individual numbers. I mean, this is what is happening. Is there some kind of a ideal you don't go over or you don't go under? Or...
Well, ideally, you want to lower everything.
Right.
I think when we look at the grand totality of it, when we switch to NIBRs, it becomes quite a bit different in the way of tracking it than what you've seen in years past, which was the UCR data where it tracked the highest level of crime.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're tracking every crime. So to say that we're going to lower aggravated batteries by X number of percentage points, that's probably not going to be realistic, because you may have an aggravated battery at the same time you had a robbery, at the same time you had whatever else, which is going to account for those number shifts. So you may have one highest event, which you will clearly try and target, but those other cascading events that are building up to that ultimate event, we can't control what leads to that. I mean, ideally, you want to see violent crime or property crime or both go down as the generic models. NIBRs really makes it kind of difficult for us to target one specific crime as a whole and say, we're going to really effort this. Because while you may have a robbery that occurs, there's usually an aggravated battery that occurs with that robbery. Does that make any sense? So it's a more total look at what crime is occurring, because you're getting all the crimes, not just the top level crime. But it is kind of misleading in some ways, because it's always been happening. We just haven't been able to categorize them because that's not the way that UCR worked. With NIBRs, it's a more complete picture for everyone, albeit a more daunting picture to kind of make sense of.
Yeah.
Okay. Going into those individual crimes, aggravated assaults, there were 16 last month. There were 0 homicides, 9 intimidations, 1 abduction kidnapping, which is, again, somewhat a misnomer. It's what was confinement, is now categorized as kidnapping and abduction under NIBRs. We had 7 sex offenses, and we had 61 simple assaults. All of those, except for the homicide, was a rise from last year at this same time. As we move now to the next set of data, looking at crimes against property, and I'll just hit a couple of the highlights very quickly. You had 15 burglaries, which was down, 7 forgeries or counterfeits, up slightly. Everything else remained fairly consistent, except for the theft category, which we fell by about 30 points. So that's not an insignificant change. That's 1 per day. And vandalisms were up slightly, again, in the crimes against property categories. Then as we get into the crimes against society, and again, NIBRs makes this kind of difficult to track as to what we're actually talking about, so we broke it down a little bit. Animal cruelty, there was 0. When we get into drug equipment, that was a drop from 54 to 32 from last year to this year. 47 drug offenses in total. Pornography remained at 6, and weapons violations remained at 3. Again, some of those are difficult to kind of wrap your heads around, but a lot of those are wrapped up in the other crimes which we've already reported, so it's not necessarily a standalone crime. It's a lesser included offense or an included offense.
Right.
Last month, there were 142 adult arrests, which was up from April of last year. There were 6 juvenile referrals, which was down from last year. We had 30 domestic violence cases, which was down by 1 from last year. And
You need
this
what
is not a
bigger?
reporting period for hate crimes.
Chris, you're not
Well, then
muted.
make it bigger. Sorry.
So any questions about the crime stats? Okay.
Do you mind reviewing, and it's not just for our new members, it's actually for me as well, reminding the shift of the 2 ways of documenting the statistics, what was behind the shift?
The federal government,
difference between
federal and state government, both were mandating that we switch to the newer NIBRs platform. We were one of the first in the state to actually make that transition. There was a mandated date, and I'm sorry, I don't remember what that was, but we were about a year in advance of it, so that we knew that we would get it right. Being honest, we're very proud of the records department because they have been just an incredible accuracy rate in comparison to what the state's even looking for. They blow away those totals every month. So it was a big undertaking to get into NIBRS as opposed to UCR. Big change for everybody. Big change in how we report, big change in how we categorize. And the people in records just did a phenomenal job, just knocked it out of the park.
I remember one of the challenges was obviously comparing year to year, because you were not comparing like data. So
Right.
It was during the transition period, it was a little trickier to interpret.
And it still will remain that for a little while as we all get used to kind of looking at trends and looking at pictures as to what are we really looking at. So.
I have a question about the source or the finding the data. I'm assuming this is online someplace. This is public records.
In the end, it is, yes. As we categorize it month to month, I do not think we publish NIBRS monthly. It's quarterly, if I remember correctly. And then you have to wait for the state and the federal government to turn around and make that into their own websites because they publish the NIBRS data. Now, that being said, we publish a phenomenal amount of different categories on our website and through the city's website, the Be Clear portal, about different happenings. There's 17 different categories at this point that we report on. And a lot of those are covered within this data sets that we've just given you.
So this is a different way to break up the data that we have.
These are mandated.
So the public wouldn't, but the public wouldn't see it this way, but for this meeting, is that a true statement?
No, it's published several different places, but again, it's got to go through the state to get to the federal government, and then the federal government turns around and publishes NIBRS data in comparison to every other place in the United States and the territories. However, they're very cautious to tell you, don't compare city to city. That's kind of one of those issues where you got to look at it and say, if we're reporting true numbers, why can't we compare? I'll be honest, I've always had a problem wrapping my head around that statement, but they continually tell us, don't compare yourselves against other cities using just the data by itself.
The reason I ask, and I'll be brief, is because we've talked in the past. I remember Deputy Chief Coulters, maybe last year, 2 years ago, where we had this conversation about, tell us what you want. And that's how we came to that last page that you're about to tell us about. And I remember, it goes to Kimberly's question, I think, at least that's what I thought of when she asked it, which is, these numbers don't mean much to me. Right. They're just numbers. And so you say, so then my very briefly, so the point is thinking about, we got these a few days ago and I went through them and they meant nothing to me then, and they're not really all that clear to me now. And then thinking about using our time wisely, thinking about what, whether you presenting us the numbers make sense, or rather you assume we read the report you give us and then we ask questions. You show up and say, look, do you have any questions? And we say, yay. And then we talk about our questions rather than the numbers. But that's just me saying that just to think back to that conversation from the past.
We would be happy to present this committee anything they want to see as far as how we break this down. We've tried to break it down to where it makes the most sense to, I guess, for want of a better word, the general public, when you categorize it into aggravated assaults and things like that, as opposed to the groups that NIBRS tends to put it in, which is Group A, Group B, and then you have to go look at a phenomenally complicated chart to try and figure out what goes in Group A and what goes in Group B, which is why we've broken it down into some of the NIBRS category, or sorry, some of the UCR categories that you've seen in the past.
And what you just said there is what I'm thinking about. You said how the public can see the information. So that was my question. Do they see the information anywhere but here? Or could they? So that, I see that CATS is on. So presenting the information has great value if this is the only place they could see it. If it's just for us and we already have the information, then the value is, to my mind at least, it's lesser. I'd rather spend my time asking you questions about what I am seeing in front of me. That was the point.
As far as your question, public, and forgive me, I think I know where you're going with that. Basically, a lot of people want to know what's happening close to me. And yes, there's the ability on the Be Clear portal to start seeing what's close to me, what happened in this neighborhood, where you can break it down by layers And then as the city as a whole, you can break that down by layers as well. So in regard to your overall question, yes, the public gets to see it. It may be in a different format, but that format's intended to make it easier for them to kind of comprehend what's going on in their world, as opposed to just these generalized numbers that we have to report to the federal government.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and just briefly to add to that, I think we've talked about this before, that I think the board in the past has expressed interest in knowing if there's a really sharp increase or decrease in these numbers, just insight into what is behind that trend that you can provide. That's probably meaningful.
Right. And I think, honestly, as we come out of COVID, we're looking, do our numbers return to where they were pre-COVID? Where do we start to see the spikes around the city? Clearly, some things have changed as far as access. You don't have some late night activities. We used to have some of the bars, the restaurants are not open nearly as late as they used to be. So when we're looking at this, and we look at it week to week, we're looking, like you said, for those trends, those spikes, what's going on different here that we didn't see before. And the whole landscape for us now has changed pre-COVID, post-COVID. And we're going to be looking at that really hard over the next few months about where do we put our shrinking resources to have the greatest effect for those exact reasons.
All right. I think you have more to report. We
do.
Your flow.
Talking about those crime series or data, we had a series of car break-ins, burglaries on East 3rd Street. We've had a large uptake in reported graffiti by about 20 events, so more than normal. I think there were 80 some events this month. Both of those are being worked on. That series of car burglaries is what we expected to see when we started to come out of post-COVID. So we'll be tracking those quite carefully. As we move on to training, there were 1,104.65 hours of training this month. Some of those highlights include mental health first aid courses, mandatory annual training blocks, which encompass 56 officers, and then the monthly training for the critical incident response team, the civil disturbance unit, and K9. We had 3 community engagements for a total of 4.6 hours with 3 officers involved. Those included visits to a preschool and a visit to the Homebridge Autism Therapy Center. Upcoming, we've got a couple things coming up in June that the Deputy Chief will talk to you about here in a little bit, and kind of highlight those. As far as police social worker, there were 30 referrals with 227 contacts by the police social worker. Some of the highlights there were they assisted a family with a teenage daughter to transition back home after a long inpatient stay. They assisted some elderly clients in engaging with doctors, and assisted a client gathering documentation of residency so he could update his identification and other items that he needed. Neighborhood resource specialist is how it's coded, but they're actually now known as the community service specialist. Took 228 calls this month. We're in the process of training what is essentially 2 new community service specialists as they begin to hit the road and help out with calls for service that do not require sworn officers, such as a property damage accident, a theft report where there's no known suspects, and vandalisms or other things like that, where they can be of great useful to us in terms of taking calls that way sworn officers don't have to. I'm sorry, Kim, you're still muted.
Kim.
Sorry, my mouse left my desk. The origin of these calls for service, are some of them self-initiated by the community resource officers in addition to the dispatch? And
let me look at the list real quick. Realistically, no. Their calls for service this month encompassed property damage accidents, some welfare checks, abandoned vehicles, serial motor checks. Those are when you need forms filled out for the BMV to verify the serial number on your automobile before you get license registration for it. Theft reports, vandalism, and they did some follow-up, which is traditionally going and talking to people after a crime just to make sure everything's fine. The rest of it came up to property, traffic hazards. Realistically, that's about what they took this month as far as the breakdown.
yeah, I wasn't clear about in my question. I mean, how are they called to serve these particular needs?
Those are all calls that came in through central dispatch.
Through central dispatch. Great.
Yes.
Thank you.
There may have been a couple that were signed from U-Report or from emails from the command staff or one of the line supervisors, but the vast majority of them are radio runs.
All right. And next item on the agenda, I think, is thank yous.
We had two of those this month. The first one was directed at Chief Dekoff and the social workers for a meeting that they had with the University of Maryland, Baltimore Police Department, who is looking to form their own social worker program. They spent quite a little time one afternoon with them answering questions and kind of showing what we had done to get the program up and running. And now that it's been up and running for a couple of years, where we're at with it. The next one came from a gentleman who basically wanted to express his appreciation for all local law enforcement, including the Sheriff's Department, Ellettsville, Bloomington PD. In fact, he made a comment that one of our officers had stopped him for a seatbelt ticket a couple years ago and used a great deal of professionalism, and he really appreciated all the local law enforcement, just wanted to take time to show his appreciation to everyone.
Oh, that's nice. General business.
I'll take this one. We are starting to, as things start to open up, we are looking to begin more of our community engagement events. As a matter of fact, you might want to mark your calendar for June 17th, tentatively scheduled for 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. at Switchyard Station. It's labeled as Community Night, and two of the primary things that will happen there will be introduce our community service specialists to not only the community in general, but also we are going to make a special point of inviting some of the neighborhood associations, as well as, presidents of neighborhood associations, et cetera, so that they can become more familiar with who the community service specialists are and what they can do for them in the neighborhood. So again, if you kind of remember, the objective of this was that the community service officers would be in the neighborhoods and essentially serve as a conduit of information from those neighborhood groups to the officers. Yes, they could handle something that didn't require a sworn police officer, but also for those things that did, they would be that conduit of information to get that to the officers that are assigned to those districts that include those neighborhoods. And, it's really just facilitating communication and provide a response to them. So that'll be one of the primaries. And then the second thing will be that—
Will there be barbecue there?
Only if you bring it. The other thing is that we are going to explain the public-facing crime map system, and this may go somewhat to what Luis was inquiring about earlier about what kind of data is available to the public. So, we've got information on the website, the city's website, that basically, you can zone in on a neighborhood and do different layers to find out, are there thefts, are there burglaries and things like that. And, you can isolate that to kind of get an idea of what's taking place in an area where you live. Sometimes if I have parents that would call and say, hey, I'm thinking about having my kid live in this apartment complex, what can you tell me about it? We can refer them to this map and they can get a better idea of themselves about what's taking place around that particular area. So again, so it'll be a nice introduction for the public to see that there are tools available for them to access information and data about crime or incidents that might be happening around them. So that's about it under general business.
What
I wanted
date
to
is
just
that?
make a statement real quick about some things that we're touching on that's kind of making me kind of like, whoo, heighten up my, it's redlining. Because individuals already know certain communities of where to go, where not to go because of certain placement for individuals. And so of course you need it for crime. So people are aware based off of, wanting to live, but that still has historical content for particular communities, and it can be redlining and different things can happen. So I just hope that we're aware of the historical components of that redlining that takes place. And I know that it's important to know what's going on as far as crime, but it just, a lot of the conversation just made me kind of like perk up a little bit, made me a little bit hesitant and nervous about what the conversations that we were kind of centering. So I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Okay. Kim, did you have something? I'm sorry.
Yeah, the date of the reveal of the public facing data. You said that there's a second event. I didn't catch the date of.
June 17th.
Oh, it's both. Both things are happening.
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
those would be kind of the two major topics for that community night.
Got it. Great.
Plus, there'll be hopefully, social workers might be there. The downtown resource officers might be there. So, we're hoping to have, this will be kind of a, you talk about the reveal. This will probably be the opportunity for us to kind of get back in the swing of doing some community engagement events, because we've been, put on hold for so long based on COVID that, we want to engage with, the community that we serve. And so this will be a great place for us to be able to do that. Not too many people have seen Switchyard Station. So it's another resource for us with a conference room there to let the community know that building exists, and we can start hosting events.
Now, it's a nice idea to do something big and then to showcase the Switchyard Park.
Well, maybe we'll have barbecue.
Yeah.
It's at 6 o'clock, right? Is that correct?
6 to 7:30.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would keep my eyes open for an official invitation. I'm just having you, kind of bookmark it right now. But I mean, we're assuming that trends for COVID will continue in a, I hate to say positive way, because it's really a negative way is what we're looking at. But you know what I mean.
Yes, I got what you're saying.
We want to trend in a good way where we can actually have this event.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay.
And McQueebe, we're tasking you to get the caterer for the barbecue.
I'm gonna get a couple caterers together, just as long as it's in the budget. So submit the budget, please.
Okay.
I think that's it under general business.
Okay, purchases, anything coming up we should be aware
I think I saw the other day, and again, I can't remember what your threshold is for you folks, but I think I saw something for about $21,000 for mobile data terminals for vehicles, and then another one came in, and it was ballpark $68,000 to $70,000, and this was for the restroom expansion project that we've talked about down at the training center. So again, I don't remember what your threshold is as far as notification, but those are a couple of larger ones that I just saw.
Yeah, I don't know a threshold, but we look at it, all of it in those reports. So, but our
So those are two that just showed up a couple of days ago. So those should be coming through, and so that's that.
Okay. And personnel issues.
Personnel issues. Okay, so as far as officers go, as of today, we are at 93 sworn officers. We lost 2 officers this week to other agencies, and we have one that is currently in a background situation with another agency out of state. 6 new officers started yesterday. The swearing in will be tomorrow at 1 p.m. at Showers, if anyone is interested in attending. We're hoping that the weather will cooperate to allow us to do it outdoors, or since things are opening up, maybe if it's too ungodly hot, we may go in and use council chambers or something like that. But 1 o'clock tomorrow for the swearing in of 6 officers. 3 of them have to go to the academy, which will begin on June 7th. 3 are already certified. But again, keep in mind that the certified officers have to go through the 15-week field training officer program. So it will be quite some time before they will truly be of value to us on a solo patrol situation. For those that have to go to the academy, keep in mind that it's about a 15 or a 16-week academy, and then 15 weeks in the field training officer program when they come back. So realistically, we're looking at November or December, for them as well. So let's see. 1 certified officer that just completed medical and psych exams. and we have to wait for the reports. I believe that would have been one that you guys gave the conditional to so that we could proceed with those medical reports. And we just interviewed 2 other certified officers that graduated from IU last week. They've both been assigned for background investigations, but those background investigations are not due for another month. So it'll be a while before they can move on in the process. And Captain Pedigo says he is looking at upcoming dates to host an open hiring process for personnel. So we are trying desperately to fill our available positions, and we're making some headway, but just about the time we think we're making headway, we get notice that somebody is either going to a military deployment or leaving us for another agency, et cetera, et cetera. But we're trying. And again, 6 officers being hired, that is a large number that's not happened for quite some time, honestly. So I met with them today and made sure that they signed their committed for life paperwork to BPD, and they laughed. So we'll see. Fingers crossed.
I have a question.
Yes.
Whenever you're finished. So how many more available open slots are there?
We have 93. I'm sorry, 93 as of today, and we're looking at that ballpark 100 to 105, absolute cap of 105 sworn.
Okay. And then what's the protocol for when police officers leave? Is it like a exit interview to kind of figure out what worked, what didn't work? Is that already kind of put in place for?
There's not a formal exit interview process for us. Most of us have a pretty good idea of why they're leaving, and it's usually for what they perceive to be greener pastures.
Okay. The reason why I'm curious about that is because I'm wondering if a lot of people leave Bloomington because of housing at times, because they can't afford to live here, so they seek elsewhere. So I was just curious if there were any additional factors of why some of your officers are departing.
I think that for the first time in as long as I can remember, police officers are in a very different position that they were many, many years ago. And that is that in some respects, they're kind of in the driver's seat where they've never been before. They basically now do what all of my college roommates that were business majors, their cops now are doing what my business major friends did back in the day. And that is that they had 3-4 opportunities and they evaluated those based on the things that were of interest to them, whether that be pay, benefits, time off, location, et cetera, et cetera. And then you pick what's best for you or where you want to go. For the most part, most police officers, if they hear of an opening and they apply and somebody gives them an offer, they jumped on it. There was not a whole evaluation process. It's like, oh my gosh, there's an opening, I'm going to go. But things are much different now where a lot of agencies, especially because of the current climate of many people getting out of law enforcement altogether, everybody needs personnel and everybody is looking to sweeten the pot to draw that personnel. And so what we're finding, and we've said this before, is that there are some places where we just cannot compete with what they are offering. And again, cops are in the driver's seat. They're making those evaluations if they have no ties here and they're young enough and they go.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
Really good question, though. Yeah. And I would love to know what, because so many people are coming to Bloomington because we're considered the greener pasture. So I'm curious to know what about Bloomington is not attractive. What's compelling them to look elsewhere? That would be good.
I think for some of your younger people who have no real ties or obligations here, they're young enough where they don't have kids in school. You know what I mean? They're not quite developed those roots that they are pursuing other opportunities because of what those opportunities have to offer that we can't at this point. And much of it's financial. I mean, it's really
Okay.
just about dollars.
Okay.
Scott deals with the uniform folks far more than I do, but I have yet to have somebody make it known to me that they left Bloomington because they couldn't afford housing.
I think kind of going with what the deputy chief said, almost everyone that has left in the last 2 or 3 years has left because wages, they were able to get substantial wages difference than what they can get in Bloomington. And along with those wages become the benefits, the car, the other equipment. Those things are very important to most officers and very important, particularly to the younger officers. And we are in a very, very competitive market at this point. You know, kind of to the realty market right now for officers, it's a buyer's market as far as, seller's market. So as they can take their trade and they can go wherever and make substantially more than they can make in Bloomington. You know, there's a lot of very close neighboring cities that love to recruit from Bloomington because they spend very, very little time in their field training programs because of the immense amount of time and care that we put into our field training program to make sure that only the qualified succeed. And you can get scooped up very, very quickly at particularly the Indianapolis metropolitan area, some of the areas north of here, some of the areas south, and the federal agencies all just grab our people just as soon as they come on, quote unquote, the market and are available or make it known that they want to leave.
Thank you.
A couple other things on personnel. I won't, our third police social worker started on Monday. So we now have 3 police social workers. And I think as Scott mentioned earlier, we have all 4 of our community service specialists in place. 2 of them, you know, still in training. So we're getting there. So all of our civilian positions, if you were, or our non-sworn to help the uniform division, all of those positions are filled currently.
Good.
And who's the third social worker? That's a pretty big deal to have 3 of them and still have all 3 of them still there. It's a big
Mallory
deal.
is her first name. I don't know her last name, but she
Okay.
is a recent IU graduate as well.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you.
And I think that's it on personnel.
All right, fire department business.
Great, thank you. I'll try to make this brief. In our statistics, especially for our operational, we are still seeing nearly double our traditional call volume. We have now dug into those EMS calls and some of the other ones that we're attributing to that. And we're finding some that we wouldn't have gone on in the past, but a vast majority of these are calls that were legitimate, we should have been on. So we're hoping that this trend doesn't continue, but if it does, it is taxing our units quite a bit. Let's see here. So for IU, they are still down, comparatively speaking, to some of their more active years. Our response data, we had talked about that we had changed, based on the graph and reporting. I do want to briefly highlight what is coming with this. So we have added our response goals to our budgetary goals, kind of a performance metric. And what we are going to do is fully mirror the national standards in our goals that we are trying to accomplish. So for what that means, we just went through our ISO, that's the Insurance Service Office process, to get a scoring of that 1 to 10. Fingers crossed, we're going for that 1, which is the best score out there. But what we're going to do is follow that. So ISO follows the National Fire Protection Association standards. It has it broken down by emergent fire calls, emergency medical calls, and it has a couple parts of that response that we're going to be reporting on a little bit differently. So for the fire calls, 90% of the time, we must have the first unit arrive within 4 minutes. And then 90% of the time, we must have the full alarm assignment. So under that guideline, it is the first 2 engines and the first aerial that arrive is considered full. So when you talk about the effectiveness of the municipal fire department, it's not just how quickly you get there, it's how quickly all of the resources get there. So we will be reporting on that. And then for EMS times, it has the same travel times. But for the turnout, which is from the time dispatch tells us something's going wrong till the time we get on the truck and actually leave, we're going to be tracking those independently. That is one of the few things in our world that we can control. You know, I can't control where the emergency is. I can't control traffic. I can't control construction, but we can control how quickly do we get on the truck. And for that, emergent fire calls, we're looking at 80 seconds or less. And for EMS calls, 60 seconds or less. And the reason being, for fire calls, you have to put on more gear. So you get a little bit more time to get ready. So those will be added to this report. We want to make sure we're not trying to report a whole bunch of different varying statistics. And I will tell you from our ISO eval, we looked at 100% of our emergent fire calls, and we met those standards with 97% accuracy. So 97% of our time, we were on scene within the 4 minutes. And it was also the same equivalent for that we had the total response force there within 8 minutes, which if you remember me telling you that looking at how we're reporting it now, the number doesn't reflect the outcome, right? We're not seeing poor outcomes. So were we choosing a wrong number to look at? And the answer is yes. So knowing that we're getting there within 4 minutes and the 8 minutes is why we are successful at what we do. Is also why we've been successful at rescuing people instead of having civilian fatalities. So if there are no other questions on the response part, then I can move on. Yes.
I do have I was going to say quick question, but they're all quick questions, so I'm not going to say that. Thank you for the last comment. I saw that 66%, and I know we've talked about it before, and I wondered what that even means. And it seems low. And then I thought, well, I was going to ask you what you just said. So thank you for telling us, which is, what are you guys telling you? What is your gut telling you? Are you seeing things in the field that don't square with that number? So, you know, the number could say 0. Well, why, who's 4 versus why 4? I was going to ask you, what does that track? And you answer that, for which I am thankful. So let me ask you then a different question, because I'm happy to hear that is the case, that you feel good about that. That's a good answer. If I were grading you, if you're my student, you get an A, but
Good.
I don't get to grade you. But on that point, so would you say, because that number, what said to me was, how are we covering the city of Bloomington? What that number tells you, right? If we have a station in every street corner, well, then we get there in 30 seconds. Right? So what that tells you is, do we have enough? Are we doing the proper job of what's the term, blanketing? There must be a better term in the business. You tell me what the term is, but that term, are we doing that properly in Bloomington? Would you, so my question is that, do you think we are?
Yeah. So the term you're looking for in our world is called the standards of cover. And it wants to know, are we meeting the standards to ensure that we are providing adequate fire protection? And in that regard, we have a few problematic areas, but luckily those areas where we don't have those fire stations within that range, they're also very new developments. So they don't have those significant calls yet. So in our world, we have to get ahead of statistics, right? We have to know where the call is going to be coming from as buildings get older, as neighborhoods cycle, as a lot of these things happen. So I will give you a very plain answer, is that we are very good with what we have now, but we are looking at all those trends and making sure that we stay ahead of those trends so that we do not have a problem. And as far as the number, it was based on science. The 4 minutes and 8 minutes have been looked at for a successful outcome. So as building construction design changes, as the furnishings change, as a lot of societal things change, those numbers and that standard may change. But based on that scientific research, and they've done a lot of it, if you can get there within 4 minutes, you have a very good outcome. If it's beyond the 4 minutes, or if you're not there with the entire group at the 8 minutes, that's where things get out of control and that you have poor outcomes. So what I will tell you is, knowing the outcomes, is that this data that we are now reporting reflects what we had been expecting to see all along.
Great, thank you.
Okay, any other questions on that? I know it's got some changes and some people may have some questions about it, but I did want to briefly pause before we ran through the rest of the statistics for the month. Okay, All right, moving on. On our public engagement and prevention, we, like the police department, are very excited to hopefully get a lot of this back up and running. We are also up to full staff on our inspectors. So we did post out the position. It's a non-union, non-sworn position, so not necessarily under the board's preview. It was an internal hire. So Bill Abram was selected for that position. And he is running solo this week. So Tim Clapp, our other inspection officer, has basically not had time off for almost the past year, being the only one. So Bill is running solo this week. The training, you can see our numbers are back up. A lot of that comes down to, we hired 9 new probationary firefighters. And then as of this Monday, the next 3 joined them. So this was a audible on our part, so to speak. We had a lot of unplanned departures that we tried to catch up with. So these 3 have now gone through the city orientation and are going to merge with the other class, finish all of their fire training. And if they need the emergency medical training at the end, they'll carry on after the swearing in, which I would like to go ahead and get you to put your mark on the calendar for July 23rd at 4 p.m. Is what we are planning to hopefully have 12 brand new members sworn in that day. Unless we hear otherwise, we're planning on having it at City Hall. And again, hope it's outside unless COVID protocols, all these things change a little bit. And if I may, would you like me to just move into the letters of accommodation and just carry down the agenda? So we do have a few. One of them we got for Chief Daffron. We have been out and about doing a lot of engagement with the community. Obviously with COVID, it's been in a different way, but this was a shout out directly to Chief Daffron, who takes a lot of pride in what she does and representing the department. And it looks like the other one didn't make it there, but we did get another one as far as for helping with the vaccination clinics. So we have now gone out to the homebound. We do that on basically a weekly rotation, and we are now going out for the mass vaccination clinics. So we've helped, Wheeler, Shalom, a lot of these other places get, shots in the arm, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. All righty, general business.
All right, so for general business, beyond the inviting you to our swearing in, I just want to give a very brief update on our fire ordinance update. We did finally get word back from the state. So just for the board's awareness, in case refresh, we cannot pass a local ordinance unless the state kind of pre-approves it, because if anything is conflicting at that level, once the city passes it, they will invalidate the entire ordinance. So we did get our pre-review done. It does have a lot of changes requested where they felt that it conflicted with their preview of what they set out. Surprising to us, we used their templates, so I'm wondering why we had so many, but we will finish those revisions. And then I would expect this board to get a copy of it before it ever goes to city council. We have been pushed off and towards the summer session before the city council would ever see this. So I will make sure the board is previewed to that, gets a copy, so that any of your questions may be answered before we go to city council for actually getting it passed. Let's see.
Moore, what is the essence of this legislation?
So there's a lot of lines of authority that are spelled out in state law that are not spelled out in our local ordinances. A good example would be, an unsafe structure. So we, by state law, have the ability, but we have never recognized that ability in a local ordinance. And so locally, we have to go through the hand department who has it built into the ordinance. We are also tied in some regards to the police department, like on false alarms, so that we can't handle our own. We need police presence. So what this is really to reestablish some authority. It will also add some teeth into our prevention department. So for those that willfully violate, fire code, which is law, that there will have some repercussions for that beyond the really, they haven't been updated since some of the 80s, some in the 90s. They're not a deterrent for anybody. And then the final thing that we're looking at is to take a reasonable approach. Prior fire administrations thought that maybe no open burning in the city was the way to go. I am under the understanding that there are reasonable and responsible uses for fire. We want to recognize those. And it's also thinking about future annexation, all these other things was one of the complaints that, you know, I can do this safely and reasonably. Why is it not allowed? So we're just making sure that we approach that with the thought of everyone's safety and health as well, while we're looking at what is reasonable.
Great. Thank you.
I have a question for general business, and I meant to ask Deputy Chief Qualtrics as well. How are you all navigating the nuances with COVID? Like, I know that you both are first responders, so individuals can decide to get the vaccine or not get the vaccine. Like, how is that conversation happen? What's the conversation within the departments as it relates to, I guess, safety for them and as first responders?
Well, great question. I'll take it from our side is, you know, we encourage the science, right? So we really talk to our employees that we want the public to trust us when it comes to things fire and emergency related, that we are not the experts in a public health crisis, that we should trust those experts. We did make the vaccine available to all of our employees as of December of last year. And we don't actively track who and who doesn't, you know, that's fits into that world of thou shall not ask. But we do encourage it. And the fact that we're out giving vaccinations has also helped alleviate some of those apprehensions and fears. And I mean, we're people as well. So, you know, some of the bad information that's floating out there, you know, we're seeing it every day, you know, while we're out there. We're not seeing those bad reactions. We're not seeing the bad outcomes. So we just try to encourage compliance through, it's the right thing, it's safe, you know, trust it. A lot of information flow has gone out as well, you know, questions. And we have seen a better response to those that were apprehensive about the RNA version. When the Johnson & Johnson more standard vaccine came out, that we did see a big grouping of people that were interested in that version.
Okay.
And I think we're the same way. I mean, we strongly encourage people to get it. And I think that much like you found nationally, those who wanted it were eager to get it as soon as it was available. But then interest kind of waned as time went on, and those that really had no interest in getting it probably never will, unless somebody near and dear to them, you know, becomes a victim of it, and then they might reconsider. But you know, we had done masking protocols within the department. You know, as we know, even when we got out on calls and that type of thing. So we tried to keep our people as safe as we could, not only on the street, but also within the building. By and large, we were pretty successful where we had no serious cases of anyone like a hospitalization or anything like that. So we're very, very fortunate. We did have people who contracted the virus, but it was a fairly mild response overall. But again, we certainly encourage the virus, still do. Everybody knows about the vaccine. I'm sorry. Yeah, everybody knows about the vaccine. But it really comes down still to personal choice as to whether or not they choose to get it, because we're not going to mandate it.
That's fair. Yeah, that's how it is over at where I work too. It's not mandated, it's highly encouraged, but that's fair. Last
Personally,
question
I just invite nobody into my office. So I've been a hermit for almost a year. I'm kidding.
6 feet distance. And then I have a final question for Chief Moore. I know that you recently completed a training with Brian Richardson. Can you tell us any feedback? How did that go? How did the department take it? Any final, I guess, thoughts that you want to share with the group of how that went or anything like that?
Sure. And just so everyone else on the board is aware, we actually were awarded a grant. So we knew that we needed to pursue diversity training. The city has its own initiatives. We had pursued down this path many years ago, looking to improve our diversity. And part of that is diversity and inclusion education. So we found Brian Richardson, who, if you are not aware, was really tied to IU. He's now with the Indianapolis Colts. He came in for 3 Saturdays in a row. That way we could hit all 3 of our shifts. best way to describe it is his job was to start the difficult conversations, to have the awkward conversations, the awkward silence, to open the door for us to be able to openly discuss these types of things in our department. Overall feedback I got was that a lot of people didn't know what to expect. You know, we all hear diversity training and then, you know, we don't know what to get. This was built for the department. So it was a survey based. He wanted to understand what was there. And then from there, it was openly engaging those conversations and having the wherewithal to be able to pivot when some of our people asked some questions that maybe he was, you know, a less experienced presenter may have gotten tripped up by. But it was really, really well received from what I've been told. And as far as we're going, no matter what the city initiative is, I think we're going to be doing above and beyond just to make sure that we are preparing ourselves for becoming more diverse, for understanding that it's not just your attitude about who you're serving, but it's who you're serving with. Firefighters are a very special breed of people, I will tell you. So, you know, we have our own niche, we have our own culture, and to open that up and understand that we can still maintain a high performance culture like that and include diversity and obviously inclusion with that. We're excited for that. And we do look to continue that training, again, above and beyond whatever the city mandates.
Thank you for that follow-up. I know that we had some extensive conversations. We went to the fire station and just kind of talked through it. So I appreciate that. Definitely warmed my heart hearing that, because Brian is incredible at what he does. And so that's really awesome. Thanks.
Chief Moore, was this training just for the fire department or did all city departments get it?
No, this one was for the fire department. And we actually had pursued a Department of Homeland Security grant to pay for it. So it was a well worth initiative, and even the state recognized that it was a good initiative. And they helped fund this initiative for us.
Wonderful. All right. Any big purchases we should be aware of coming up?
I'm going to say no at this point. I do know that we have several capital things coming down the pipe, but I do not believe there were any in your packet that I'm aware of. There may be some what we consider smaller purchases with the grouping of all the new recruits. So we did have to purchase a lot of uniforms and things like that. And then in the coming months, we will be looking at a few new vehicles, a mobile air cart, which allows us to refill our breathing air on site. So when we're, especially like the recruits, we're doing a lot of transporting of air back and forth. And then we will have physicals coming up, which is a substantial cost, but I don't think it's in your packet right now.
Thank you. Any personnel issues?
All right, so for personnel, we currently have 3 openings. We just had one more leave as of last week. We have 3 on FMLA, 2 on light duty. I don't know if you've paid attention to the payroll, but our overtime is at our historical highs. Our department has never been down double-digit positions, and we are having to backfill a lot of overtime. So with that being said, we are being cognizant with all the overtime that we're being very careful not to exceed work thresholds. There are limitations on how many hours you can work. And I also want the board to be aware that with that personnel issue, that we do temporarily what they call brownout or put out of service the squad. Especially when there's temporary things like we need instructors to teach the new recruits, we're not taking a large unit out of service, but we do put the smallest EMS unit out of service occasionally. We are documenting those failures because it is a vital piece of what we run. But at this point, we don't want to degrade the fire service any more than what it needs to be. So that is it for personnel issues.
All righty. Thank you for a great report. Do we have any old business? Seeing none. The CERT ARV deployment report.
Typically, we report on the previous month. So, I mean, this month would typically be April, but I will tell you that we had a deployment on this past Sunday. Just because it's so relevant and you may hear about it, I'll just go ahead and let you know that we dispatched our CERT team in support of county deputies who had an individual The original call came in as shots fired that supposedly there were 3 deputies that were pinned down when they tried to serve a warrant on Mount Gilead Road, so out off of 45 East. But we did, in fact, deploy for that. And of course, the ARV is their mode of transportation, so that's how they got there. There was a peaceful resolution. The individual was taken into custody without incident. But again, because it's so fresh and relevant, I'll just not wait for the month and let you know about it.
Yeah, thanks.
In case anybody saw that thing rolling through town on Sunday evening, just to let you know now. That's what it was.
It made the paper today, in fact.
Yes. Yes.
That's DHT. And they do what they can.
Mhm. New business.
I just have one thing that when Maquiva asked about the vaccine, it kind of reminded me that this would all kind of go under wellness. We launched finally, and I know Susan Yoon had asked several times about the welfare and mental status of our officers with all the exposure and that type of thing. A couple of weeks ago, we had some of our personnel finish up peer support team training. So we now have launched a peer support team. It consists of 3 sworn officers, 1 from our records division, 1 from the civilian, and that would be like the community resource people. But I'm having an officer do double duty because she is also a retired member of the department. So she's wearing 2 hats. That is of the civilian employee as well as a retired representative. And then we have 2 from dispatch. So we had wanted more, but the space was limited in the training, which is a good thing because there were other agencies that were participating. But we have launched that, and we now have them available to our folks in the event that they might need to talk to somebody. So I understand that they are also trained in dealing with stress debriefing incidents. As a matter of fact, we offered them up to the county after the incident on Sunday for the officers that were dealing with that individual out there, and they apparently had another resource. But again, it's a very, very positive thing for us. But thank you, Maquiva, for kind of reminding me about another wellness thing that I had intended to include under general business, and I just forgot to put it down there.
Yeah, that's
Thank
really
you.
good to know.
Yep. So.
Yeah, it's good to know. And then if once it gets up and running, maybe get it processed and all stuff like that. We'd love to hear more about it during the reports moving forward. It'd be good. But I mean, whenever it'd be good.
Yeah, we're going to keep general statistics on that. Obviously, we're not going to, keep names and circumstances, et cetera, but we do hope to keep general statistics because we want to make sure that people are taking advantage of the opportunity.
Confidentiality.
Yep. So yeah, absolutely. Confidentiality is an absolute.
Okay.
Unless we find that there is somebody that we believe might be a danger to themselves or can't perform their job because of what might be bothering them, in which case the peer support team member that's consulted has an obligation and a duty to report that up the chain of command. We do not want to have someone out there that's at risk to themselves, other officers, or the community that they are supposed to be serving. So
And that's
we're
where some
hoping
of
that never comes up, but that would be the only time when confidentiality, I don't want to say violated, but
right.
you know what I mean?
Yes.
But there is an obligation to ensure that everyone is safe, and that would include the individual.
Yes. And that's where a lot of the social workers can come in to support, I'm sure. So thank you.
I told them that even though they did not really get an opportunity to attend the training, although Melissa has been, that the social workers, it's a given that you're going to be involved in this program.
Right. Thank you so much.
Yep. And we hope to have another training in November where we might even get more people.
Okay. Awesome. I'm rooting for you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Any petitions or communications from the public? I don't see anyone in our room.
Seeing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So,
Hi, Shruti. Thank you. All righty. We'll see you in a month,
Yep.
if not before.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank-
Swearing in
Thank you.
tomorrow.
thank you all.